Hello, everyone, and welcome to BrainX Talks. BrainX Talks is your favorite podcast on all things machine learning, AI, and all of that interconnected world into innovation around this area. It is actually an attempt to engage in deeper conversations with leading figures and their work that intersects this very, very exciting space. I am Ashish Khanna. I am currently professor and vice chair of research with the Department of Anesthesia and the section on critical care medicine at the Wake Forest University School of Medicine and the Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. Outside of my full time job as an intensivist and as an anesthesiologist, I love to figure my way around research and innovation in the world of AI and in the world of perioperative and critical care outcomes, specifically when it comes to playing with big data. I am also one of the founding members of Team BrainX. And today I am delighted to welcome on our podcast a very dear friend, a collaborator, a mentor, and colleague, Dr. Amol Joshi. Welcome, Amol. Thank you for coming on for BrainX Talks.
Ashish, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of your podcast and have this chance to uh, interact with you and share ideas with your audience. I think the work that BrainX is doing is very important in terms of bringing people together from different backgrounds and disciplines to think creatively about how to use AI to solve problems. And I'm thankful to be a part of this effort.
Thanks, Amol. Now, the next part for me is challenging because I've known Amol for about 3 years now, and I've obviously seen all of the great things that he's a part of. I'm going to try and summarize this abbreviated bio that he sent me, and I will tell you that there's much more to him than just the next minute or two. I'm going to try and read off some of these things. But just in terms of a brief introduction, Amol is currently the Thomas H. Davis Professor in Business at the Wake Forest University. He holds a joint faculty appointment as Associate Professor for Strategic Management at the Wake Forest University School of Business and as an Associate Professor of Innovation and Commercialization at the Wake School of Medicine. Importantly, and we'll talk about this today, Amol is an inventor and an entrepreneur at heart. And I love this. Amol, you say you're an inventor who helps others reinvent themselves. That is truly what all of us want to do. He has a passion guiding aspiring entrepreneurs, executives, and students at all levels to pursue their business dreams. He's worked with several startup founders, industry leaders in the US and Austria and Denmark and all over the world. With his expertise on innovation, he has created and commercialized new technologies and launched them and funded new ventures. He has more than a decade of experience as an engineer and entrepreneur and in work with venture capital funded startups in the Silicon Valley. Specifically, I want to highlight the two patents that he has co-invented, and some of these are very important for physicians who deal with lots and lots of patients every day. He co-invented a patent for an AI-based voice assistance product. So specifically, he founded Be Vocal, a speech recognition software setup that was acquired by Nuance Communications. All of us are very familiar with the Nuance. And then he served as the VP of Sales and Marketing from 1999 to 2003. Amol has also advised NIH, NASA, and the U.S. Department of Energy on innovation policies, and then Amol, I have said enough, but I do want to say that you've got this long history of our entrepreneurship, but outside of that, I do want to highlight the fact that you educated yourself from the best business schools in the country. at Chapel Hill, and then an MBA and MS in engineering at Dartmouth, and a BS in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. So lots and lots. I'm out of breath just finishing all of that. But thanks again, Amol. And I'll jump straight to it. I want to know, and the viewers and the listeners want to know, Amol Joshi's journey. And I know it's probably a long story, but maybe Amol Joshi's journey in 5 minutes. How and where did entrepreneurship and AI meet during this journey?
Yes, and thank you, Ashish, for that kind introduction, and again for having me be a part of this conversation. To describe my journey, I think it's best to go back to one or two of what I believe were the formative experiences in my career. And I would say I started out, I was born in India. I'm originally from India. I grew up here in the US. But my first job after graduating from Georgia Tech with my degree in electrical engineering was in Japan. I worked in Panasonic for Matsushita, which is the parent company, the owner of the brand Panasonic. Your listeners might be familiar with Panasonic, a leader in consumer electronics and materials, competed very actively against Sony. This was way back in the 90s, around the time of the bubble economy. And Japan was at the forefront of electronics around the world. So for someone like me, who's an electrical engineer, a chance to go work for one of the leading producers of consumer electronics products was a remarkable opportunity. And so although I'm from India, I actually have lived and worked longer in Japan than I have in India. And I speak Japanese, but I don't really fluently speak any Indian language, which
Okay.
befuddles my relatives, but is part of my background. And I only mention it because very early on, if you recall, in the 90s, Japan was at the forefront, a leader in quality, design for manufacturability, understanding the needs of the customer or the consumer, and really having an ability to put all the things together in a quality, cost-effective design. That's the training ground I grew up in my early part of the career. And those lessons have always stuck with me. So one is about how to design products with the customer in mind, how to get out of the lab and actually talk to customers and see how people use your products in the field. I think the other thing working in Japan gave me was a broader perspective on the people you need to have in the room when you're designing a product. Uh, Panasonic in general, but most Japanese companies at that time really had an interdisciplinary approach. You would have manufacturing engineers, design engineers, graphic artists, people who knew marketing, sales. Even when you worked in engineering, you would rotate through sales and marketing so you got exposure to customers. You weren't just cloistered in a lab. So all of those things really helped shape my thinking in very early on as an engineer. So when I came back to the US after my stint in Japan and went and did my MBA and master's in engineering, I had a different background in preparation and a different way of thinking than most people. The other thing that really influenced me was when I was there in Japan, it was at the start of the mobile phone revolution, and Japan was quite far ahead of other countries, especially the US. And after graduating from my MBA and seeing the opportunities that were here in the US, I got together with some other American engineers who had worked with me in Japan and also with one of my MBA classmates from business school. And we saw this opportunity because mobile phone technology was arising and emerging quickly in the US to create a new type of technology. And this was using your voice to browse web content over the phone. And this was the early genesis of the voice assistant technology. And now I know it doesn't sound exciting. It's in fact quite mundane. But imagine this was 25 years ago. This was before smartphones. This was in 99. Content was just emerging online. And we thought that there was a way to take advantage of all that content being available and navigate it using your voice. So simply speak
So,
into the
so
phone.
you're at this point you're still in Japan, right?
No, this is after I've returned to from Japan. I came back to the U.S. And part of the
Okay.
reason I came back to the U.S. is between the time I graduated and then 95, the internet had happened. You had, so I had to retool. So I went back, I did a master's in computer engineering, focused on computer architecture, upskilled my business knowledge, I worked for a startup or a high tech company in Boston for a year, and then I decided to go out on my own. And I reconnected with some of the other folks that I had worked with earlier in my career, and we started in the spare bedroom of my friend's house in San Jose, a classic garage kind of startup, and had this idea to surf the web over the phone before
Wait,
smartphones.
so this is really interesting. Someone told me the other day that AI is something that has not happened yet. So back then, did you think this was artificial intelligence? And did you call this artificial intelligence? Did you believe that this was something amazing that you'd stumbled on, this whole voice recognition and surfing the web?
We didn't classify it as artificial intelligence per se. We did look at it as machine learning. It was a form of
Sure,
machine learning,
sure.
and we were all trained as engineers. And in fact, our area, without getting too technical, was digital signal processing. How do you take an audio signal and convert that into text? It's basically pattern recognition, which is the underlying technology that's the basis of much of what we call AI today. Now, the thing to keep in mind is our computing platforms, the hardware and software, were very primitive and basic. We only had a fraction of the computing power you have today. As I said, they weren't smartphones; they were dumb phones, you would call them. So, to answer your question, we focused and we described it more as machine learning or adaptive algorithms. We didn't really call it AI. AI wasn't believable. You weren't talking to HAL 9000 from 2001 Space Odyssey. You weren't at that level, but people could see the potential there. But we had some basic problems to solve. Remember, if you're talking over a mobile phone, before you can understand what the person's saying, you have to filter out the background noise. There's other basic problems you have to figure out. So I think we were a couple of generations before where we are today. Again, 25 years ago. It's remarkable the progress we made. I'm amazed at where we are today.
So how did that evolve, Amol? From obviously you started with a Siri 25 years ago to where you are today. Did you ever think that you'd be an educator in a big university? Was that the plan 25 years ago?
Um, it wasn't precisely my plan, but I do have to say, again, going back to Japan, I did have an early inspiration that it might be possible. If I might share with you, one of the people who most influenced my thinking was my first boss in Japan, and he ran our lab. And while he was running our lab, he went to a nearby university and did his PhD, and then he was teaching classes. And his plan after he retired from Panasonic was to go and teach and help others. So I had seen someone do it before. When I came back to the US and then moved along in my business career after I had done my MBA, I had a number of opportunities to go back to the classroom and work with students. And I'm grateful that I did it. One, because the students ask really sharp questions and make you think and keep you energetic and active, but also because I always felt that there should be a way to give back. I had a lot of ups and downs in my entrepreneurial career. Many people helped me and mentored me, and I was very fortunate to have the successful outcomes that we reached, but I didn't do it alone. We had a lot of help. And I just thought if there's a way to give back, I would like to do that. So after our company was acquired, I was at a point personally and professionally where I could do something else. And I thought long and hard about what I might want to do. So I kind of took the unusual path. You mentioned in the opening reinventing yourself. I reinvented myself as an academic. So instead of an academic who became an entrepreneur, I did it the reverse process. I was an entrepreneur first. I went back and did my PhD. In fact, I was the oldest student in my PhD program, older than my advisor and many of the faculty who were teaching me. I had to unlearn a lot of the things I learned as an entrepreneur, learn new ways to do things, and become an academic and learn how to look at things in a more rigorous way so that I could teach others. It's not just about telling war stories in the classroom. You want to have some sound scientific basis for that. And I thought there was a lot of room to give empirically driven evidence to help guide entrepreneurial thinking. And that's what I've been focused on. It's really the same problems I had when I was an entrepreneur. I'm just looking at it as an academic, not competing in a company. But that's how I
So,
made that journey.
so where do you sort of describe yourself as, you entrepreneur, innovator, educator? I know you wear all three hats of the many hats you wear. Which of these three do you most closely associate with?
I would say of the three, the one that I most closely associate with is inventor. And even more precisely, I always think of myself as an engineer. I'm fundamentally an engineer. I've been trained as an engineer. I tend to think of problems as an engineer. I uh, I relate well to technical founders and scientists of companies because I think like they do. I've just had perhaps a bit more exposure to the business side and know how to do that in translation. In fact, I would describe what I do now, a lot of my work, and I'm sure working in a major academic learning health system, you can appreciate this. I think of myself as a translator between the lab coats and the suits, right? Right now, I'm wearing a suit. I've
So am I.
spent
Yeah.
a lot more time on the business side, but I think that's where I feel most comfortable is in a lab. There's an idea on a whiteboard. How do we get this off of the whiteboard and into people's hands so they can use it? We need a lot of different functions. No one person knows how to do it. I'm kind of comfortable in the middle, but I see myself more as an engineer than anything else, an engineer who happens to work as an educator, an inventor who's had a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. But I think that the engineering building things is what pulls it all together for me. And that's how I describe what I do.
So this is perfect segue for I was going to ask you about the commercialization journey. You described
Mm-hmm.
an idea on a whiteboard. If you come to the main hospital building and you walk around here, there'd be, all of these physicians and other healthcare professionals who have all of these ideas that they think about every single day, right? And loosely people will say, oh, if only I could sell this idea, I'll be a millionaire, right? But no one, I think less than 1% of all ideas thought of actually make it,
Mm-hmm.
right? What would be, I know it's difficult to sort of say this in 5 minutes because people have written books on this, right? If I have an idea, I'm a busy clinician, right? Yes, I can put it on a whiteboard in my office and stare at the idea, but how do I take that idea from being on the whiteboard to actually developing a commercial product and then, making a career out of it, so to speak?
Yes. I think that's an excellent and a powerful question and the right question to ask. What I've learned about this, and I will apply this to the healthcare setting, because remember, I came from the software world and I came from a largely unregulated market and unregulated business where the cost of entry are low, the barriers to entry are low, the capital required is less, and you can get to market quickly.
Hmm.
Healthcare is the complete opposite of that spectrum, as we know. It's the highest risk and perhaps highest return, long time horizon. And to get to commercialization, to get to that, I think one of the pathways, what I would say if I had to summarize it in 2 words, it'd be risk reduction. How do you get to risk reduction? What I've learned in moving from the commercial software business to more the healthcare sector and being part of an academic learning health system is you have to focus on reducing risk. And this is why my own thinking has evolved to get more active in national innovation policy and particularly funding. There's a lot of wonderful basic science and discovery that you and your colleagues do every day, Ashish. Venture capital will never fund that, and nor should they, because it's far out on the risk spectrum. It's a basic discovery. It could be a breakthrough, but it could be decades away from being commercialized. Government or private philanthropic foundations are the only source of funding for that because they're the only people who will support that kind of discovery. It's part of capitalism. Private investors will not be attracted to that. So I think having the policies in place to get that funding for basic discoveries. And I think that's where I come in. When I see folks like yourself and others who have really interesting ideas that have a lot of impact on improving healthcare, what I often see is the gap is to get that translational piece done from the basic scientific discovery to a working prototype. And I think connecting folks like you and others, many of the students or postdocs who might be on the call, the medical students, is how do you tap into those funding sources, whether it's federal agencies or the philanthropic foundations, and use that to de-risk the idea? And I think that's where you lean into your scientific training. You've all had a decade or more, decades in some cases, of training. You know how to do excellent science. You just need funding to have that science, and then you need some help with the English to English translation of how to get that into business speak, how to get people to understand your idea on the outside. And I think that's where myself and many other people who've been on this journey can be a useful outsider perspective to getting it done. But I'd say the name of the game is risk reduction. And I think and accessing these outside funding sources, bringing that in, and then being ready to present the idea to the private sector for further investment and development.
And how does the private sector sort of look at risk on a scale of 1 to 10, so to speak? Like, I might think of something as, this is not risky at all. This is going to do this to our patients. For example, the work I do on continuous monitoring of our patients on hospital wards using wearable technology. I think it's a common sense intervention. It helps save so many lives. I sometimes feel there is, when I try and pitch some of those ideas to industry, they may think of that risk and that benefit differently than I do as a clinician scientist. Is there a way that both parties can learn from each other and understand that there is a middle ground somewhere, or do I have to do something different to present risk differently?
I think that you're asking a profoundly important question. How do you frame the riskiness or non-riskiness of an idea to get people to adopt it? And I think that the meeting of the minds, if you will, between the scientific community and the investment community needs to converge around what are the controllable risks. So, for example, you're developing a new idea and you're looking at how can we use AI to help us in perioperative planning for some patients.
Yep.
And we want to use information that's already available to us about the patient as well as from other sources. It could be from their health records or their wearable devices, other testing or scans that we've done. How do we use that? And how do we use that to not only accurately, but reliably, safely, in a trustworthy way, make some diagnosis or help us make a diagnosis or appropriate plan of care? Let's say we're working on something like that. Well, within that, what are the risks that you control? Some of it is it's inherently difficult because you're trying to take what you've distilled through a few decades of medical training and experience on the front lines and put that into an algorithm. That's going to take time. But that's a controllable risk. That will just take time, scientific study, trial and error, prototyping, discovery. What may not be controllable is the regulatory part of it. You could do all of this, and to the extent it's an application that needs regulatory approval, the regulators may or may not approve it. It may take them a long time. So factors outside of your control. So I think the key is, if you're trying to translate the idea and get outside support or funding beyond the initial grants, you want to go to venture capital or the investment community, you have to focus on what are the controllable risks that you can define, and then lean into your scientific training and background and show how you can systematically address those. And, if it's a matter of, if we have this much funding, we can do this much testing, we can do it. The next question that venture capital is going to ask is, okay, if we give you twice as much funding, can you do it twice as quickly? Maybe, maybe not. And that's kind of a litmus test. Some things it's just going to take time to develop. Other things you might be able to speed up. So I think that's one thing. And control the uncontrollable risk or the things that are outside of your control, you leave that to others. And I will just say one thing I've noticed that I've seen first-time entrepreneurs, myself included, make a mistake is they try to define the market or the opportunity in such a narrow way that it looks like there's no competition. Because they think, oh, we're the only ones with a solution. This is more attractive. That's exactly the opposite of the correct thing to do. Because if a venture capital investor sees no competition, the light bulb goes off. There's no market for this. It sends the opposite
There's no
signal.
interest, right?
You
Yeah.
want there to be competition. You want there to see there's a market. What they want to see beyond that is you have some unique IP or intellectual property, an idea you can protect. You can build a moat or a defensive wall around it so people can't get into it. And in that case, regulation is your friend. If you can be first to get the market and get regulatory approval before others, then that creates a barrier that can actually help you. So it's not all bad, but I think keeping that in perspective. But you asked a very good question. How do we get the two worlds to meet? Because their brains are wired very differently. I think it's very hard, but you have to start with how they frame risk and how they frame what's actually controllable and what's not.
That's great, Amol. Let me just quickly touch on another issue that a lot of times, in the startup world or first time entrepreneurs, they'll get stuck with, you know, can't break through with that first round of funding, right? And I hear a common complaint saying these days it's very difficult. This wasn't the case 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Is that true? That it's becoming more and more difficult for first time entrepreneurs to break into a Series A funding, and if that's the case, are is that trend going to continue? Do we need to again do anything differently as entrepreneurs?
Yes, and again, I think that's an insightful question that you're asking for first time entrepreneurs. Like many questions we have in academia, I would say the short answer is it depends. It depends on what sector of the market you're in. I'll just give you an example. Again, I think you're probably more than familiar with, and your audience will key into. In the healthcare sector, if you're doing back office applications of AI, which there's many things, you could do things to improve the revenue cycle, that's largely unregulated. You do have to have concerns about privacy and other things like that. But that's essentially software as a service type of business model. That's something that's well understood and it's largely unregulated. That is a very um, uh, useful risk adjusted return, a very valuable risk adjusted return that an investor will see right away. It's a software business model. It's just in the healthcare sector, but it could be adopted very quickly. There's standard metrics. There's standard ways to measure performance in terms of recurring revenue, all of those type of things. Having a subscription model, and these days, I would argue on that spectrum, it is much easier because a lot of the tools we had back when I was an entrepreneur, we had to build a lot of our own tools and infrastructure. The cloud, as we know it, didn't exist. These software repository, these open source tools didn't exist. Now, for free or low cost, you can develop a lot of things. You can even self-fund to some extent to get to proof of concept. So that's one spectrum. The other side, I would say, where it's what I call hard science solving hard problems. The deep tech is another term people use for that. I do think there is some merit to the argument that it is harder than ever. And I think part of it has to do with venture capital comes in cycles. Remember, ultimately, venture capitalists and private equity investors are responsible to their shareholders or their investors. Right. They are going to look for liquidity and returns. If you tell me this could be the greatest breakthrough in medicine in a certain field, but it's going to take at least 10 years, very few institutions or investors have the patience to do that. It is harder than ever. We still need to invest in those things. And I think that is why, as a university, as an academic learning health system, we need to be involved in that because no one else will invest in those things.
Are venture capitalists speaking to the right people, though, as their experts? Sometimes I feel that the venture capitalists, may not know everything about heart failure, or you know hemodynamic management during surgery, right? Might go out seeking an expert, and then sometimes I feel that they seem a little lost in terms of asking the right questions, right? Is there realization within the venture capital world that they need to be speaking to the right experts to really help them ask the right questions?
Well, I think that you're pointing to an important area for improvement. As investors, we can all benefit if um, the investment organizations are more proficient in doing diligence. And there's technical due diligence, there's also the management diligence on the team. Both of those are hard. I think in the technical due diligence, the medical field and the subspecialties are evolving so quickly. It's hard to find the right experts. And you can have a venture capital investor or partner who's an MD, a PhD, even an MD, PhD, but whatever their narrow specialty is, that doesn't transfer over to something else. And again, I think that's where a place like Wake Forest, where we are, and we're part of a nationwide system, we have access to so many people. I know, your area is anesthesiology and critical care, but if there's related specialties, you can probably easily get to the right person. And I also think that's the value of a community like BrainX. You can get to the right people who can bring the knowledge. And I do think there is an opportunity to build some bridges to venture capital so that two-way flow can get going. I think the better of venture capitalists look to MDs and folks like yourself to scout those deals and to kick the tires and make sure. I do think the part, though, that venture capitalists have gotten better and continue to get better and better at over time is the other part, which is even if these are world-class scientists, do they have what it takes to be the top-notch founders? Can they build the team? Can they recruit the talent? Can they run the business? And at what point do they need to perhaps bring in other professional managers to help them with that? I think that's the part where there also has to be an awareness on the scientist side that there's a limit to our skills of what we can do.
Right. Which is exactly what I need from you now. I need an elevator pitch for a physician, or if you're trying to motivate a physician who is interested in dipping his or her fingers into entrepreneurship but is worried. And you know what the worry is? The worry is, I have a full time job, I have a salary that comes to me every 2 weeks or at the end of the month. Do I need to give this up totally at some stage if I have to really get into the world of entrepreneurship? Is it okay just dipping my fingers, testing the waters? How do I do it? And at what stage do I say, oh, okay, this is it. I need to commit one way or the other. I know I'm asking a lot. It's probably more than just an elevator pitch, but how would you motivate people?
Well, I would say the short answer to your question is no. You don't need to give up your scientific and medical career and profession to pursue this idea. And again, I think this is actually where policy comes in. I've been a part of programs at various federal agencies, NIH, NSF, NASA included, called ICORE, the Innovation Core program. The basic idea is if you have an NIH or NSF funded research project and it has commercial potential, you as the scientist can have one or more members of your team, and it's often a postdoc or a doctoral student, a graduate student, take the entrepreneurial lead and explore this idea through a program that's designed to give commercialization training and know-how to someone who already has a scientific background. So the idea is NSF and NIH have spent billions on funding these projects. They'd like to see some of them reach commercial potential. The right idea is not necessarily to take you out of the lab, but there might be people you're working with who do want to explore it and who would benefit even if they don't start a company and they become an academic faculty member or work in a corporate R&D lab. Having that experience is beneficial for the country in terms of the workforce. So the idea is, again, these grant programs can help you test an idea without putting the full risk of your career and going on a different trajectory. And I think that's important because in this type of thing, in the health sector especially, the failure rate is high. By design, 90% or more are going to fail. And we want you to be able to go back to the lab. And by the way, I've been through the ICORE program myself. I've done it through DOE, Department of Energy. The best outcome we had is when we went through this project and we were doing a new clean energy technology in that instance, we actually went back and were able to apply for and get a more competitive, larger funding grant to further de-risk our idea and then eventually get venture capital. So what I'm saying is, again, comes back to risk reduction. There's many ways to stage the risk reduction. As a physician, that's not necessarily the solution. There are other pathways to do that. And I think this is where federal agencies have woken up that they need to provide this alternate pathway. And I think it's a very viable mechanism. And by the way, if there's any folks in your audience or listening community that would like to learn more, I'd be happy to talk about it. This is part of what my academic research as a professor is on, is how can we have more effective policies so that we can spin these ideas off the university, so we keep the best talent in the university, but we also enable the ideas to get forth into the market.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Amol. Thank you. I think this has been really, really insightful, and I will tell you that I feel truly fortunate that I have you as a colleague in my network here, that I can lean on to you, even outside of this podcast, where I can reach out to you and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. How can you help me? And I think that that's where you will see that we really need to work together. And from that perspective, I think there'll be a lot of our listeners who may want to reach out to you. Is it okay for me to share your contact information with them if I have people reach out?
Please do. Please feel free to share my contact information as well as LinkedIn. I would love to connect with your listeners and viewers. I think it's important. The community is not about the technology; it's about the people that you and Piyush and others are bringing together. And I think the more we connect and figure out how to work together, the more we can advance and bring these very important innovations to helping patients save lives, alleviate suffering, all the important work that you're doing. And I just want to take a moment to commend you and your colleagues and collaborators for the work you're doing. I think it's an important conversation, and thank you all for leading the way.
Thanks, Amol. Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners. With that, we come to the end of another episode of BrainX Talks. For all of you who are interested, if you want to listen to and see Dr. Joshi, he's going to be available for contact afterwards. If there's questions, please reach out to us. Visit our LinkedIn page. Be a part of the BrainX community. We are here to help you. It costs you nothing and adds so much more to what you can learn and do with all things big data, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We are also available at brainxai.org for more information. Do drop us a line. Stay in touch. We would love to hear from you. And again, until next time, to all of you and all of the listeners, and to Amol, thank you and stay safe.